Hello, this is Deb Wanger. Today we're going to talk about how you get the additional information you're going to need to be able to do an effective interview and to write a compelling news story for your first assignment. So, part of the news gathering process involves getting the facts. And journalists try to answer what we call the 5 W's and the H: who, what, when, where, why, and how. So, who is affected by the information that you've learned? Let's take an example of a tuition increase at Ole Miss. So, who's involved in making that decision? Well, of course, the university, but also the state. The Institutes of Higher Learning Board has to sign off on a tuition increase. Who's affected? Well, certainly students, but who else is affected? Maybe parents who are helping to pay for tuition. So what happened or will happen if the tuition increase has already been approved and has already taken effect? What do people need to know about this increase? Well, they probably need to know exactly how much it will be, right? They'll also want to know when it will happen. So what group of students is going to be affected by this first? And you might also talk about, is there an opportunity to take action? Perhaps this is a proposed tuition increase and people are going to have an opportunity to express their views on it. So what's the deadline for that? What's the process for that? So the when might be an important factor. Where did this or will it happen? Or where do people need to go? If this is a public hearing about the tuition increase, you want to make sure that people know how to get there. Why? This is sometimes left out of news stories because it can be difficult to get at, but it definitely makes a news story more compelling. So why is there a tuition increase? Trying to backtrack what the reason for charging students more money really is. Is it what the university says it is? Or is it they've hired 6 more administrators who have gigantic salaries and somebody has to pay for it somehow? So why does the tuition increase matter to people? Is this going to mean fewer students are able to attend? So the why of the story is often where the best information lies, but it can be difficult to get at. And how? How will this happen? How can people respond? You know, that's similar to what we said earlier. Can people protest this? Are there ways around it? How does a tuition increase get decided? How do they decide how much? So this would be more of a process story. So if you're going to do a big picture piece on tuition increases in general, you would definitely want to look at the how. So we've talked about different ways to find news stories, and one of them I suggested to you is going on a site like PR Newswire and just typing in Mississippi in the search box and seeing what pops up. So I did that today, and one of the stories that popped up was this lengthy news release about tech jobs. And as you'll see here on the screen, this is a company called Experts Exchange. So they're the source of this information within this news release. And according to their news release, they say that the programming language, so the computer programming language with the most jobs and the least competition by state is laid out here on this map. So if you look at Mississippi, even though they have determined that there are a significant number of job openings for people who know Java, the resumes that they also analyze indicate that the fewest people have those skills. So if you're thinking about that, that might make a good story because stories about where jobs are always interesting to people. But this is a news release, so I think, as we mentioned earlier, you have to take news releases with a grain of salt, right? There may be some hidden agenda. Maybe Experts Exchange provides training in the area of, Java language. So you would want to take what they say with a grain of salt. So one of the things you're going to want to do is you're going to want to check out their site. So let's go to the PR Newswire here, and I had already put in Mississippi, and this news release came up. So this is the release where I got that information. And they often will have a little area at the bottom where they'll even give you the name and contact information for someone to talk to about the news release. Now this one doesn't have it, but it does have a link to the Experts Exchange website. So this looks like a pretty professional website. I'm feeling a little bit more confident about the information, but you can be fooled, of course. And I want to still look a little further. I want to see if there's a way to get in touch with people. I can read about the company itself to figure out, well, is it likely that this is going to be a legitimate organization? So, I see that at least on paper or online, this looks pretty good. And then I click on Contact Us, and I see, okay, that there are people that I can get in touch with. And so this might be one step in my process to determine whether or not the information that they published in their news release is valid. So that's helpful to me. Another thing that I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to figure out, well, once I've established that I'm comfortable with the information in the news release being accurate, and I understand how they made this determination, how did they, what was their source for jobs? What was their source for resumes? So once I feel comfortable that their data is valid, then I need to ask myself some more questions. So I want to find an expert to interview on this. So I ask myself, who's in charge of this information? In this case, it might be the author of the study. So maybe if I call the company, I can get connected with the person who did the original study, and I can get some information from them. That may or may not be possible. Sometimes organizations aren't very forthcoming, especially when they're talking to student journalists. But I can ask myself, well, who would be an expert on this topic? Well, we're lucky. We are operating within a university, and there are going to be experts in the area of computer languages, right? So the Ole Miss School of Computer Science, or the School of Engineering and the Department of Computer Science, is going to be a rich hunting ground for us. So let's go back and let's go to our trusty friend Google, and let's put in Ole Miss Computer Science. And very quickly, we now have a link to a source for experts. So every department or school at the university will have a very similar layout. And you click on People, and it's going to default to faculty. Now, you might just try kind of cold calling any of these folks. I happen to know Dr. Wilkins is a wonderful person. Or another way to get to this first expert is to click on Staff and choose someone who looks friendly here, either one of these folks, but probably Mrs. Long is a better choice because her role is more conducive to this. And call and ask her who would be the expert within the faculty in the area of Java. And so then you now have identified someone that you can talk to about this study. Who's affected by this? If there are jobs open for people who have this particular skill, how might the computer science department react to that? Certainly students might be interested in this. Students who are in computer science classes might want to know that a Java class could help get them a job more easily. So we've gone from getting a nugget of an idea. We are vetting it, trying to make sure that the information that we're using to base our story on is valid. You will probably want to take the full report to the interview with you with the expert so that you can share all the background that you have. You found an expert on campus. You're already thinking about who's affected because the next part of the process is going to be to interview people beyond the expert. And you're starting to think about what the news hook, the reason for doing the story will be. So the story is where computer science students can get jobs in Mississippi. Another example of this same kind of process. So we talked a little bit about the people that we know as being rich sources of information for our news stories. Now, it seems like everybody I talked to since we got back from the break has been talking about the flu. And you'll see that the CDC, Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, tracks a lot of information related to health. And one of the things that they do is they track flu outbreaks around the country. So health departments monitor flu because flu can very easily get out of control and be quite deadly. So health departments track flu and report it to the Centers for Disease Control. So the great thing about information that you would find on the CDC is that you can depend on its accuracy. It is a government agency. Its reports are taken very seriously. I can't remember hearing about a CDC report that was inaccurate. So I think you can just tell yourself that if you find information on the CDC, you can go with it. Of course, you'll want to attribute it to the Centers for Disease Control, but I think you can just assume if it's published there that the information is reliable. So what you see here, and this is for the week ending December 27th, 2014, there's widespread flu problems around the country, and definitely here in Mississippi. So what do we do again? So we ask ourselves, who's in charge? Well, who's in charge of reporting flu in the state of Mississippi? Well, the state health department. So going online and Googling for the state health department is going to be a good way to figure out whether or not there's an expert there that you might talk to. But you might not have to work quite that hard because who else might be an expert on flu? Well, someone in the medical profession, right? A nurse practitioner, a doctor, a nurse, a health department worker. So there are plenty of people who could add and offer some expertise on a story about flu. Then you ask yourself, who's affected by this? Well, certainly anybody who's had the flu is affected, but also pharmacists are affected, right? Anybody who gives flu shots is affected. So we can go beyond just the expert, beyond the medical professional, to get to additional people who are affected. I mean, you might even say this could be a business story, right? Think about how much flu medication that Walgreens and CVS must sell during this time period. I mean, I wonder whether a drugstore would tell you what a great boon in business this is. They may not. But who's interested in a story like this? Well, anybody who comes in contact with lots of people. So faculty members or other students who haven't had the flu, talking about what they do to keep themselves from getting sick when everyone around them is ill. Another example, I think I mentioned that governmental agencies are great sources of news releases or information that they post on their websites that can lead you to stories. So the Oxford School District, the school board posts its agendas for its monthly meetings or bi-monthly meetings online. And for the last meeting, one of the things they posted is the school safety report. So this is through the first 3 months of the school year, and it's a little troubling. I haven't seen any news organizations do a story about this. I'd love to have someone in this class do a story about it. But you'll notice here that if you compare last year to this year, we're trending up. And in fact, in month 2, we were up fairly significantly. So contacting someone at the school board, So going online and Googling Oxford, Mississippi School Board, going to the website and finding a point of contact, maybe it's the superintendent is where you start, or they actually have a PR professional working for the school system. So Kelly Graber, you find her name on the website and contact information, and you say, I want to do a story about Oxford School District's School Safety Index. I've noticed that it's up fairly significantly from last year. What's the reason for that? So again, I'm trying to figure out who's in charge, and they might point to a police officer. So what's behind that? Is it drugs? Is it violence? What has caused the number of incidents related to school safety to increase? Who's an expert? So that might be the school resource officer. You might get stuck having to interview the PR person, but whenever possible, you want to get as close to the person dealing with the information as possible. Who's affected? Well, of course, anyone who attends an Oxford school, parents, absolutely, teachers, and depending on what the incidents involve, you might find some different people are affected by this. Who's interested? Again, same group of people. Parents with kids in the school system, teachers, principals, students. So this kind of backgrounding for your story is going to help you determine your expert and determine who else you need to talk to and arm you with information that you can use to conduct really strong interviews. So, when you're doing your research, you want to find out as much as possible before you begin interviewing people. And anytime you tell a story, you want to know who your experts are, and you want to know people affected by the information you've uncovered, because that's going to give you some of your impact quotes. That's going to give you that emotion or personal observation that's going to make your story resonate with readers. Always need at least 2 sources, but more is generally better. So for our stories, you're always going to need 3. If you go beyond that, wonderful, but you should never do a one-source story. It's generally not going to be as strong as it should be. Get the names right. So spell their names right. Ask them for their name spelling. You can never assume that you know how to spell someone's name. And get addresses, ages, times, exact causes. The more specific and detailed you can be, the better. Accuracy is job 1 for a journalist. And get the data. You know, when you talk to the health expert about flu in Mississippi, don't just say, so I understand flu is up. Ask by how much. If you're talking to the school system about the incidence of school safety, what is the exact number? How many drug offenses were there? Percentages sometimes don't help us unless we can get a sense of what those percentages mean. So get as many specifics as possible. Some questions to think about asking. Can I have your full name and how to spell it? You will never regret, I think, asking that question right off the bat and getting that out of the way. You want to establish the person that you're interviewing as an expert by asking them things like, how long have you been a school resource officer? How many years have you been the head of the Lafayette County Health Department? Those kinds of pieces of information are going to help establish that person's credibility. So you want to show some common courtesy when you're talking to your expert by showing that you've done some background, some research. So you want to say, well, I know that we teach classes in JavaScript here at the university and that you are routinely one of the instructors for that. Why do you think there are so many jobs requiring that programming language? You also want to find out what is new or what is special or unique about the story. So all the examples that we used, there's a pretty easy news peg, right? Violence is up, or school safety problems, I should say, are up at local schools. There are jobs open for people who know Java. Flu has increased. But you might do a story that's a little less clear cut, and so you might want to find out what's new about it. If you say to yourself, I really want to do a story about study abroad options, because there are going to be lots of opportunities for students to learn about that in the coming weeks. So what you've got to do is you've got to work hard to make that story new. That story gets done all the time. So the questions you're going to want to ask are things like, are there any new countries that the university is now going to? Are there any new programmings, new ways for students to get scholarship money? So you're going to have to really push that expert to get the news for your story. And make sure you listen. I can't tell you how often somebody will say something in an interview and you won't respond to it at all because you're thinking about your next question. You're not thinking about what the person is saying to you. So be sure you really listen to their responses, and that way you can ask better follow-up questions and make sure that you understand when they say things that are very important. Other questions you might ask along the same lines, what plans are there for the future? So what are the plans for reducing the number of school safety incidents? What led up to this? Are there any causes why we might have seen an increase in the flu? Why the change or why no change? Who do you expect to be most affected by this? So who is getting most flu cases, or who's being affected most by the flu? Usually it's elderly or young people, but maybe you learn it's actually college students. Well, that makes a great news peg for your story. How much will this cost? Where should I go to get more information? Is there anything else I need to know about this? It's really good when you have an expert right there in front of you to let them help you find out as much as possible about the story. So questions like the two at the end here can be really useful. So let's brainstorm some questions we might ask of our health expert on the flu epidemic story. So let's say we get the head of the local health department to talk to us. And you're going to want to get some of those facts and figures, objective questions, and find out how many cases of flu have there been? Have there been any flu deaths? Is there any projection for how long this is going to last? So you want to get those details so that you can give us a good picture of what the flu situation is and where it's expected to go. Then you also want to ask that health expert some questions to get that personal expertise or human emotion. So you might say, has anyone in your family been affected by the flu? And what was that like? What is your recommendation as a health expert for anybody who's concerned that they might be exposed to the flu, and how to either minimize the symptoms or prevent it altogether? For the person with the flu, now they're not going to be able to tell you the statistics, but they could tell you, did you get a flu shot? What precautions did you take? What have you done to treat yourself? What has it been like to have the flu? Is anyone else in your family sick? So you want to ask a series of objective and subjective questions to get the best quotes possible. So here's your assignment. Again, you're going to summarize your story in 1 to 2 sentences. I would expect that your story summary is going to evolve as we go forward, as you learn new information, as you find a better news hook. So make sure that your summary is staying as current and accurate and compelling as possible. You're going to find the expert for your story. So this is someone who is a decision maker or a subject matter expert. This is not a student. Students are not experts unless you basically make the case to me that for some reason this student is the expert on this topic. And it is very rare for me to ever sign off on that. So you will be fighting an uphill battle. So be looking for someone, an official, someone who runs an organization, someone who's in charge of an event. That's who we want for this first interview. You're going to videotape an interview, and most of you are going to use your smartphones, I'm sure, and I will include a little link to a tutorial on how to get the best audio and video from your smartphone. I will link that on Blackboard, so you'll see it there under Student Resources. And you're going to want to make sure and test and play around with your camera to make sure that the audio that you're getting is usable. So don't just sit down to do that interview, record, and never listen back to it before the entire interview is over. Do a little test, listen to it, make sure you're getting good audio. Then you're going to upload that interview of at least 5 minutes to YouTube or Vimeo. The great thing about shooting with your smartphone is that it will compress the video for you. If you use some other kind of video recording device, you might have to go on Google and figure out how to compress the video to speed up that process, or it could take a really long time. So this is due on Blackboard under discussions. Make sure you check for the due date because there will be no late interviews accepted. Good luck.